The billionaire heir pretended to be a gardener to test the new tutor, and what happens leaves everyone in shock. Before we begin the story, tell us in the comments which city you are watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. She was face down in the mud, with one shoe in each direction of the garden, when the most handsome man in all of Charleston appeared. And it wasn't just any mud. It was that dark, thick mud that smelled like premium organic fertilizer, impossible to ignore and even worse to wash off. But let's go back 3 minutes. Because Marigold Bennett, Goldie to close friends, didn't wake up that morning planning to become human fertilizer. Goldie parked her car at the entrance of Montgomery Manor and her jaw simply dropped. That was not a house. It was a postcard. A white mansion with huge columns, gardens that looked like they were designed by perfectionist angels, and magnolias so beautiful she felt like apologizing for existing near them. She looked at her vintage wristwatch, her grandfather's, and whispered, "Sir Tix-a-lot, are you seeing this? This house has more columns than my bank account has digits." The watch, of course, did not respond, but Goldie was sure it judged her. Okay, posture, confidence, I am a professional. She adjusted her bag, smoothed her skirt, and took the first step toward the front door. That was when the hose attacked. She didn't even see where it came from. One moment she was walking with dignity. The next, her foot caught on something green and treacherous. Her body spun in a way even a ballerina couldn't manage, and she flew. She literally flew. For about 1.5 seconds, Goldie experienced freedom. Wind on her face, the sensation of floating. Then she met the ground. Splat. The mud welcomed her like an old friend. It hugged her face, her arms, her dignity. It entered her hair in a way no shampoo in the world would approve. Goldie stayed there, motionless, processing her new reality as compost. "This is not happening," she murmured to the mud. "You don't exist. I don't exist. None of this is real." The mud did not agree or disagree. It simply continued being mud. Goldie lifted her head slowly, spitting out something she hoped was a leaf and nothing else, and looked at the watch on her wrist, now also covered in mud. "Sir Tix-a-lot, on a scale from 1 to 10, how impossible would it be to dig a hole and live in it? Because I am seriously considering an underground career." That was the exact moment she heard the voice. "Need some help?" Goldie turned her head toward the sound, and her brain simply shut down. Standing 3 meters away, holding pruning shears, and wearing the most unfairly tight work shirt in the history of uniforms, was a man who had no right to exist in real life. Chiseled jaw, eyes the kind of green that should be illegal, broad shoulders, and a small smile at the corner of his mouth that clearly said, "I saw everything, and I will remember it forever." Goldie blinked, then blinked again. The mud slid down her face like a clown's tear. "I'm fine," she said, trying to get up with elegance. It did not work. Her foot slipped, her knee gave out, and she fell again, this time on her stomach. The man had the decency not to laugh out loud, but his shoulders shook. Goldie saw it and took note. "The hose attacked me," she explained, still on the ground, because at that point her dignity had already left by taxi. "It was an ambush, premeditated. It was waiting for me." He approached and held out his hand to help her. "The hose does that sometimes. It has personality." "Personality." Goldie accepted his hand, firm, warm, slightly calloused, and let him pull her up. "That is not personality. That is a conspiracy against my emotional stability. I will let her know. Please do, and tell her this isn't over. This is only the beginning." Goldie pointed at the hose with her mud-covered finger. "Do you hear me? Rubber hose? We will meet again." The hose remained there, coiled, looking innocent. But Goldie knew. She knew. The gardener, because that is clearly what he was, judging by the uniform and the tools, handed her a clean handkerchief from his pocket. "I'm Steve. I work in the garden. Goldie, I'm here for the tutor interview." She wiped her face, only managing to spread the mud more evenly. "This is exactly the first impression I wanted to make, by the way. Covered in fertilizer. Very professional. 5 stars. Steve actually smiled this time, a smile that made strange things happen in Goldie's stomach. Or maybe it was just her breakfast protesting after the fall. "The main entrance is over there," he pointed. "But maybe you should use the service entrance. There is a bathroom close by." "Steve, you are an angel disguised as a gardener." I've been called worse. Goldie started walking in the direction he pointed, but stopped and turned around. Hey, Steve. Yes? If I get this job and you see me falling again at some point, pretend you don't know that version of me. He crossed his arms, still smiling. Agreed. But which version should I know? The version that doesn't turn into compost on the first day. She exists. She's rare, but she exists. Goldie dragged herself to the service entrance, found the bathroom, and spent the next 10 minutes having an existential crisis in front of the mirror. Okay, she said to her dirty reflection. Okay, this happened. We can't go back in time, but we can move forward. We can be professional. She looked at Sir Tix-a-Lot. What do you think? Can this still be saved? The clock said 2:15. She was late. Right? I'll take that as a go-on, warrior. Thank you for the support. 15 minutes, 2 paper towels, and a short prayer later, Goldie looked presentable. Not perfect. Her hair still had a faint brown shade that wasn't natural, and there was a stain on the hem of her skirt that wouldn't come out at all, but presentable. She walked to the front door, this time avoiding the hose like someone avoiding a landmine, and rang the bell. The door opened, and Goldie was immediately transported into a period film. Marble floor, crystal chandelier, a curved staircase that seemed to climb into infinity, and paintings. So many paintings of serious people that Goldie felt she was being judged by entire generations of people long gone. You must be the applicant. The voice came from a woman at the top of the stairs. Blonde, thin, dressed in white as if grief only happened to other people. She came down each step with calculated elegance, every move a declaration of superiority. Priscilla Montgomery, the stepmother. Goldie swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. Marigold Bennett, Goldie. Priscilla stopped a yard away and examined her from head to toe. The look was so cold that Goldie felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. You are late. I had a small incident in the garden. With the hose? A hint of a cruel smile. It does that to everyone. Goldie noticed Priscilla didn't look surprised or sympathetic. The position is temporary, Priscilla continued, walking toward the living room without checking if Goldie followed. The children need supervision until I find a more permanent solution. I understand. You do not understand. Priscilla turned. You are the 7th applicant in 3 months. The other 6 didn't last. I hope you last longer, but I will not have expectations. Goldie felt something inside her bristle, something stubborn and irritated. May I ask why the others didn't last? You may. It does not mean I will answer. The silence that followed was heavy enough to have its own postal code. Then footsteps, small and fast. A little girl of about 4 ran into the room, golden curls flying. Aunt Scylla, Miles doesn't want to play with me and... She stopped when she saw Goldie. Big, blue, curious eyes. Hi, Goldie said, crouching to be at her level. I'm Goldie. What's your name? Rosie. The girl came closer slowly, like a little animal deciding if the human was trustworthy. Are you the new lady? Yes, I am. The last lady left crying. Rosie, Priscilla snapped, impatient. Go call your brother, now. Rosie ran out, but not before looking at Goldie one last time. There was something in that look, something that tightened Goldie's heart in an unexpected way. Minutes later, Miles appeared. 10 years old, dark hair, the posture of someone carrying the world on his shoulders. He looked at Goldie with practiced indifference. Hi, she tried. Hi. And that was it. He sat on the farthest sofa, crossing his arms like a human fortress. Goldie glanced at Sir Tix-a-Lot discreetly. Tough crowd, she whispered. Priscilla clapped her hands once to get their attention. Miss Bennett, I must make it clear. You were hired by the family board, not by me. If it depended on me, these children would be in a boarding school in Europe, where they would be someone else's problem. Goldie blinked. Had she really said that in front of the children? Rosie didn't react. Miles didn't either, as if they had heard it 1,000 times. Your job is simple, Priscilla continued. Keep them occupied, keep them quiet, keep them away from me. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Excellent. Carmen will show you your room. Start tomorrow. And just like that, without another word, Priscilla went up the stairs and disappeared. Goldie stayed there, in the middle of that enormous hall, feeling very small. A small hand tugged at her skirt. Rosie, you're leaving soon too, right? The question was so soft, so full of an old pain, far too heavy for someone so young, that Goldie felt her chest tighten. She crouched down again, looking into the little girl's eyes. You know what, Rosie? I fell face first in the mud today, right in front of the most handsome gardener in the world, and I'm still here. Rosie frowned, confused. That means, Goldie continued, that I don't give up easily. Okay? The girl didn't smile, but she didn't pull away either. It was a start. Goldie stood up and looked at Miles on the couch. He pretended not to be listening, but she saw it. He had heard every word. She sighed and looked at the clock. "Sir ticks a lot," she whispered. "What kind of trouble did we get ourselves into?" The clock kept ticking. Quiet, steady. Outside the window, Goldie saw Steve, the gardener, trimming the rose bushes. He looked up, met her eyes, and gave a small wave with a gentle smile. Goldie felt her cheeks warm. Focus, she told herself. Traumatized children, evil stepmother, mansion haunted by judgment. That's the job. She looked at the garden hose coiled on the ground, and revenge on irrigation equipment. That too. The first day at Montgomery Manor had been a disaster, but Goldie Bennett wasn't someone who gave up. Especially when there were children who needed someone, and a mysterious gardener who smiled like he carried secrets. She just didn't know yet that the secrets in that house were bigger than anything she could imagine, and that the hose would be the least of her problems. The hose stared at her from the garden like a sleeping snake. Goldie took a sip of coffee and tightened her fists. "Today will be different," she murmured. 3 hours later, she was lost in the third identical hallway of the East Wing, dripping with rosebush water. But let's go back a bit. The morning had started with promises. Goldie woke up in the tiny service wing room, a shoebox with a window, determined to prove she wasn't just another disposable tutor. "Day 1 of Operation Don't Get Fired," she announced to Sir Tix-a-Lot, resting on the bedside table. "Plan: win over the children, avoid the evil stepmother, and make peace with hostile gardening equipment." The clock showed 6 in the morning. "I agree. Too ambitious. Let's start with coffee." Finding the kitchen should have been simple. It should have. But Montgomery Manor had the floor plan of a maze designed by someone who didn't like visitors. Every hallway led to another hallway. Every door looked the same, and the portraits on the walls followed her with their eyes in a chilling way. "Sorry, Mr. Montgomery No. 5. Goldie told a particularly stern painting, "But could you stop judging me? I'm just looking for caffeine." Mr. Montgomery No. 5 didn't answer. But he didn't look impressed either. After 20 minutes and 3 staircases that shouldn't exist, Goldie finally found the kitchen by following the smell of fresh bread. And there was Mabel. 60-something, gray hair in a bun, hands covered in flour, and a smile that clearly said, "I watched you get lost 3 times through the window." "Good morning, dear. Coffee?" "Please," Goldie almost begged. "And a map, and maybe a GPS. How many hallways does this house have?" 42, counting the secret ones. "The secret ones?" Mabel handed her a large mug of coffee and slid it toward Goldie. 40 years here, dear. I've learned this house holds more secrets than a bank vault." She gave a little wink. "But you'll find them. The interesting ones always do." Before Goldie could ask what that meant, Rosie walked into the kitchen, pulling a faded stuffed rabbit. "Good morning, Miss Goldie." Goldie's heart melted a little. "Good morning, Rosie. Did you sleep well?" "I had a dream about dragons, but Miles said dragons don't exist." She looked genuinely sad about it. "Miles is technically correct." Goldie crouched down to the girl's eye level. "But between you and me, I think they just retired. They're somewhere drinking tea and complaining about knights." Rosie let out a tiny giggle. Small, but real. Mabel smiled behind her coffee mug. Miles appeared seconds later, already dressed, already serious, already carrying the invisible weight 10-year-olds shouldn't carry. "Good morning, Miles," Goldie tried. "Good morning." Silence. "So, what's the plan for today?" "I don't know. You're the tutor." "Fair enough. Right? How about we start with, I don't need a tutor." Miles looked at her with those dark, too serious eyes. "I need my father back." And then he walked out of the kitchen, closing the door hard enough to make the cups tremble on their hooks. Goldie stood there, feeling as if she'd taken a punch to the stomach. Rosie tugged on her hand. "He didn't mean to be unkind. He just misses him." "I know, dear." Goldie squeezed the small hand. "I know." Mabel placed a piece of toast in front of her. "Eat. You will need the energy." She was not joking. 2 hours later, Goldie was in the library trying to organize an educational activity when she bumped into a small side table. The vase on top, Old, probably very expensive, definitely irreplaceable, wobbled. No, 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 no. Goldie lunged to catch it. She did. For 3 glorious seconds she was a hero. Then her elbow hit another vase. She did not catch that one. The sound of porcelain shattering echoed through the mansion like an apocalypse siren. "This is not happening," Goldie whispered, staring at the scattered pieces. "This is not happening." "It happened." Priscilla's voice cut through the air like an ice blade. Goldie turned slowly. Her stepmother stood in the doorway, dressed in black this time, wearing a pearl necklace that probably cost more than Goldie's car. "That vase belonged to the grandmother of the late Mr. Montgomery. I am sore. It will be deducted from your salary. But I have not even received my first salary yet." "Then you are already starting in the negative. Welcome to reality, Miss Bennet." Priscilla turned around. "And clear these pieces before the children get hurt, since you are so dedicated to taking care of them." The venom in her last sentence could knock down a horse. When Priscilla left, Goldie sat on the floor in the middle of the broken pieces. "Sir Tix-a-lot?" She took the pocket watch out. "I am starting to think those other 6 tutors were the smart ones." But giving up was never Goldie Bennet's strength. So she cleaned the mess, took a deep breath, and decided to do something constructive. Make peace with the hose. Because if she was going to survive in that mansion, she needed allies, even if they were made of rubber. Goldie marched to the garden with the determination of someone going to war. The hose was there, coiled, innocent. "Listen here, Mrs. Rubber Hose," Goldie pointed at it. "I came in peace. You declared war, but today we are making a treaty." She picked up the hose carefully, opened the faucet slowly. The water began to flow gently. "See? Civilized, mature. We are adults." The hose exploded. There is no other word. It simply exploded in a direction that defied the laws of physics, hitting Goldie right in the face with the pressure of a firefighter's jet. "Betrayal," Goldie shouted, trying to control the hydraulic beast. "You are a traitor." That was when Steve appeared. Because of course he did. He crossed the garden in 3 long strides, took the hose from Goldie's hands, and turned off the faucet with irritating ease. "You have to twist the nozzle first," he explained, clearly trying not to laugh. Otherwise the pressure becomes a complete disaster, I understand." Goldie ran her hands through her soaked hair. "Thank you for the applied physics lesson." "You are welcome." Steve tilted his head, studying her with those impossible green eyes. "You know, for someone who declared war on gardening equipment, you are quite brave to return to the battlefield." "Brave or foolish, I am still deciding." He smiled, and Goldie noticed for the first time, how he spoke, the precise way of speaking, the straight posture, the way he chose his words. "You do not seem like a regular gardener, Mac," she said before thinking. Steve tensed. It was subtle, but she saw it. "What do you mean?" "I do not know. You talk like someone from a book, too educated." "I read a lot. In the garden." "It is a literary garden." Goldie narrowed her eyes. There was something there, something that did not fit. But before she could investigate, Mabel appeared in the kitchen doorway, and her look clearly said, "Storm coming." Mabel did not say anything. She only looked at Goldie with that expression that said, "Come now, no questions." When Goldie stepped inside, she found Rosie sitting on the stairs, holding a worn fairy tale book, her big eyes fixed on her. "Miss Goldie?" The girl's voice was so small. Could you read me a story?" Goldie felt something tighten in her chest. She was still soaked from the war against the hose, her hair dripping on the marble floor, and she probably looked like a creature that had crawled out of a swamp. But Rosie looked at her as if she were the only person in the world who mattered at that moment. "Of course, sweetheart." Goldie crouched down, accepting the book. "But you will have to lend me a towel. I am creating a puddle." Rosie let out a tiny laugh and took her hand. 20 minutes later, Goldie was sitting on Rosie's bed. A room that looked straight out of a fairy tale, all pink and white, with stars painted on the ceiling, reading about a princess who saved dragons instead of being saved by them. And then, Goldie used different voices for each character. The princess said to the knight, "Thank you, but I do not need rescuing. I need a better ladder." Rosie laughed, that little bell sound happy children make. Goldie felt a warm and protective wave rise in her chest. That was when she noticed Miles at the door. He was standing there, half hidden in the hallway shadows, pretending he wasn't paying attention. But his eyes were fixed on the book, on the drawings, on Goldie's voice bringing the words to life. She didn't say anything. She just kept reading. "Dragons are not monsters," the princess explained. "They are only afraid, and when you are afraid, sometimes you spit fire by accident." Miles took a step into the room, then another, until he was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed but listening to every word. Goldie finished the story. Rosie yawned, settling into her pillow. "One more?" she asked, sleepy. "Tomorrow," Goldie promised, fixing the blanket. "Dragons need sleep too." Rosie held her hand before she could stand up. She pulled Goldie closer, hugging her with those small, warm arms. "You smell like flowers," she murmured against Goldie's shoulder, her eyes already closing. Mom also smelled like flowers. Goldie froze. She felt her eyes sting. She looked at Miles, who had turned his face toward the window, pretending to look outside. But she saw his reflection in the glass, saw him bite his lip hard. "Your mother had good taste then," Goldie whispered, holding the girl a little longer. "Flowers smell nice." Rosie smiled, half asleep. "Stay a little longer?" "Of course." Miles stood quietly and left the room, but before disappearing completely down the hallway, he looked back. "Thank you," he said, so softly that Goldie almost didn't hear it, "for staying." And then he was gone. Goldie stayed until she was sure Rosie was truly asleep. Then she left the room, closed the door softly, and leaned against the hallway wall. "Sir ticks a lot." She took the watch from her pocket. "I'm starting to love these children. That breaks survival rules, doesn't it?" The watch kept marking time. Tick, tock, constant. "I agree. Terrible idea. Let's do it anyway." She went downstairs, crossed the silent house, managing not to get lost this time, a small victory, and stepped out into the garden. She needed air, space to think. The magnolias were blooming, their sweet scent filling the night. And there was Steve, trimming the rose bushes under the moonlight, as if working at 9 at night was perfectly normal. "Do you not have a home?" Goldie asked, walking closer. He looked up, that small smile appearing. "I could ask the same. I thought tutors went to bed early." Tutors with traumatized children and evil stepmothers have occupational insomnia. She sat on the bench under the magnolias. "Besides, I just had a moment with a 4-year-old who mistook me for her mother, who is gone. I need air before I have a full emotional collapse." Steve put down the pruning shears and sat beside her, not close, but close enough for her to feel his warmth. "Rosie is getting attached to you. Miles too, I think." He stayed at the door listening to the whole story and pretending he wasn't. "That is progress. Or the start of a disaster when I leave." Goldie looked at the watch on her lap. 6 tutors before me, Steve. 6. What makes me think I will be different?" "You stayed. It has been 2 days, and you are already reading bedtime stories and declaring war on hoses." He tilted his head, studying her. "The others would have given up after the first broken vase." "How do you know about the vase?" "Mansion. Thin walls. Priscilla has a voice that goes through concrete." "Fair." Steve pointed to the watch. "That is important to you." It was not a question. "It belonged to my grandfather." Goldie ran her fingers over the worn metal. "He raised me. He said time was the only thing no one could steal from you, only you could waste it. So he gave me this when I turned 18, to remind me." "Remind you of what?" "That every second matters, that every moment with the people we love is a gift." She smiled, sad. "He died 6 months later, but I had this watch and all the memories." Steve was quiet for a moment. He seems to have been a wise man. "He was." Goldie looked at him. "And you? Why does a gardener work until 9 at night?" He hesitated. That tension again, as if he was calculating every word. "Someone has to take care of what was built here. The responsibility of protecting what the father—" He stopped suddenly, his eyes widening for a split second. He cleared his throat. "What the former owner built, the plants, the garden, these rose bushes are old." Goldie frowned. "You talk as if you knew Mr. Montgomery." "I worked here for years. I knew his work." Steve stood up too quickly, grabbing the pruning shears. "I should finish this." A lie. She knew it was a lie, but she didn't know why. "What do you think, Sir Tix-a-lot?" Goldie looked at the watch with theatrical exaggeration. "Trustworthy?" A dramatic pause. She tilted her head, pretending to listen. "Too handsome to be a gardener? I agree. Extremely suspicious." Steve stopped pretending he was busy with the roses. He turned, that reluctant smile appearing. "You talk to the watch. He is an excellent listener, and unlike certain people, he does not lie about who he is." Steve's eyes met hers. Something passed between them. Something heavy, true, and frightening. Before either of them could speak, Mabel appeared at the kitchen door with a tray of tea. "You two are going to catch pneumonia out here," she announced, placing the tray on the bench. "And before you ask, yes, I was watching through the window. 40 years in this house taught me. Always watch who sits under the magnolias." Goldie accepted a cup. "Is that advice or a warning?" "Wisdom." Mabel looked at Steve with a smile that knew too much. 40 years in this house also taught me something else," she said, picking up the empty tray. "Always watch who sits under the magnolias. It is where the Montgomerys always brought the people who matter." She went back inside before either of them could answer. Goldie blinked. Is she mysterious or does she just enjoy confusing people? "Yes," Steve replied, and disappeared among the rose bushes before she could ask what that meant. 2 days later, the entire house smelled like imported roses and anxiety. Goldie watched from the second-floor window as men in tuxedos unloaded golden chairs, as if Priscilla were preparing a coronation instead of a simple tea. Simple, she almost laughed at the word. "Sir ticks a lot?" She took the watch from her pocket. "I have a bad feeling about this." The watch continued its steady ticking. "You always agree with me. That is why we are best friends." The bedroom door opened without knocking. Priscilla entered like a storm of beige silk and expensive perfume. "The children stay in the room during the tea," she announced, without preamble. "Locked, if necessary." Goldie turned slowly. "With all due respect, Mrs. Montgomery." "There is no respect in what you are about to say, so spare us." Priscilla examined her perfectly manicured nails. "I have 23 Charleston socialites arriving in 2 hours. They do not need to see these noisy children running through the house as if they had no brakes. They are children, not obstacles. In this house, they are whatever I say they are." Priscilla's eyes were cold as ice. "And you, dear, are replaceable. I hope you last longer than the others, but I am not optimistic." She left, a trail of threat hanging in the air behind her. "This is not happening," Goldie murmured, looking at the watch. "We are not going to let this happen." But it happened. At 3 in the afternoon, the garden was turning into a magazine scene. White tables, cascading flowers, women with hats the size of small umbrellas, laughing in that way wealthy people laugh when they want everyone to know they are wealthy. Goldie kept Miles and Rosie in the room, reading stories, playing games, trying to ignore the sound of laughter downstairs. Miles was too quiet, Rosie too restless. "I need to go to the bathroom," Rosie announced. "The bathroom is right there, dear." "No, the big one, the pretty one." "Rosie, we cannot." But the girl had already slipped out the door. "No!" Goldie ran after her. "Rosie, come back." Miles followed. "She goes straight to the garden. She always does." He was right. Goldie ran through the hallway, went down the stairs, only tripping once, progress, and went through the kitchen door just in time to see Rosie running toward the magnolias, her pink dress flying behind her like wings. Straight toward where 23 women were having tea. "Rosie!" The girl did not hear, or pretended not to hear. She ran across the lawn, laughing, free, beautiful, and fell right into the decorative pond. The world moved in slow motion. The splash, the scream, the women jumping from their chairs. Priscilla freezing with her teacup in the air, her face turning into a mask of fury. Goldie didn't think. She jumped. The water was cold, green, full of aquatic plants that wrapped around her legs like sticky fingers. She grabbed Rosie, pulled the girl against her chest, and surfaced coughing, with a frog on her head. "Sir ticks a lot," she gasped, feeling the weight of the creature. "Please tell me this is a dream." The frog croaked. The socialites were silent, then burst into restrained laughter behind fans and napkins. Priscilla did not laugh. She stood up slowly, set the cup on the table with a precise click, and walked to the edge of the lake. Her eyes were pure burning ice. "Out, now." Goldie tried to walk out with dignity, but the water plants had other plans. She stumbled, almost dropped Rosie, regained her balance, and finally managed to step onto solid ground. The frog jumped off her head and back into the lake. "Traitor," she murmured. Priscilla waited until everything was silent, until all 23 women were looking. Then she spoke, her voice low and venomous. "You have until the end of the month." Every word was a blade. "After that, you and these children will learn where you belong." Goldie held Rosie tighter. The girl was trembling, crying softly against her wet neck. That was when Steve appeared. He crossed the garden in 4 long strides, took off his work jacket, and wrapped Rosie in it. Then he looked at Priscilla with a coldness Goldie had never seen before. "She is 4 years old," he said, and his voice was not a gardener's. It was the voice of someone used to being obeyed. And she was scared. Priscilla blinked. "Excuse me, who are you two?" "Someone who has worked here long enough to know that children are not obstacles." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "They are the only thing that matters in this house." He picked Rosie up. She clung to him immediately and held out his hand to Goldie. "Come on." Goldie took his hand. It was warm, steady, safe. They walked into the kitchen, leaving a trail of water and water plants behind. Mabel was waiting with towels and hot chocolate, as if she already knew this would happen. 40 years, she murmured, wrapping Rosie in a towel. Always the same story. 2 hours later, after warm baths and dry clothes, and Miles finally relaxing enough to sleep, Goldie stepped outside into the garden. The socialites were gone. The golden chairs, too. Only the magnolias remained, and the smell of roses and the sound of the Trader Lake. She sat on the bench, took Sir Tix-a-lot from her pocket. The watch had survived the plunge, waterproof, thanks to the grandfather who knew she was a walking disaster. "Maybe I'm not right for this," she whispered to the watch. "Maybe Priscilla is right. Maybe I'm just another one who won't last. You are the only thing that's right in this house." Goldie jumped, turned around. Steve was standing in the shadow of the magnolias, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on her. "How long have you been there?" "Long enough." He came closer, sat beside her. Not too close, but close enough. "You jumped into a lake to save a child you barely know. You ruined an important event. You risked your job. And I earned a frog wearing a hat. And you earned the respect of 2 children who don't trust anyone." Steve looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made Goldie's heart beat faster. That's worth more than 23 socialites and 1,000 elegant teas. Priscilla doesn't agree. Priscilla doesn't matter. The way he said that, with such certainty. As if he had the authority to decide what mattered in that house. "Who are you?" Goldie asked suddenly. "Really?" Steve grew tense, that familiar tension. He opened his mouth, and Miles came running in, his face pale. "Rosie is having a nightmare. She's calling for you." Goldie stood up right away, looked at Steve one last time. This conversation isn't over, but his eyes said maybe it would be better if it was. Rosie was curled up in bed, her knees pulled to her chest, crying softly. "She left again," the girl whispered when Goldie sat beside her. "Mom left and didn't come back." Goldie knew Rosie wasn't talking about her biological mother. She was talking about Priscilla, the stepmother who lived there in the mansion, only 2 hallways away, and still too far for her own stepdaughter to reach. "I'm here," Goldie murmured, rocking Rosie gently, "and I'm not going anywhere." Miles appeared in the doorway, watching quietly. Then he came in and sat on the other side of the bed, his small hand finding Rosie's. They stayed like that until the girl's breathing calmed, until she fell asleep again, holding Goldie's arm like a life preserver. The next 3 days were strange. Steve avoided her, not in an obvious way. He still showed up to trim the roses, still waved from a distance, but he never stayed long enough for conversations. Never stayed long enough for Goldie to ask who he was. "Sir Tix-a-lot," she whispered to the watch as she watched Steve disappear behind the shed for the 4th time that day. "Is he avoiding me, or am I just getting paranoid?" The watch didn't answer, but she could swear the ticking sounded judgmental. On Thursday morning, Priscilla called everyone into the living room. Everyone meant Goldie, the children, and Mabel, who came from the kitchen wiping her hands on her apron with an expression that clearly said, 40 years have prepared me for this moment. "Saturday," Priscilla announced, examining her nails as if she were deciding the fate of nations. "There is a charity dinner at the country club. The children will go. You," she looked at Goldie the way someone looks at something stuck to the bottom of a shoe, "will go as their escort." "Of course," Goldie answered, ignoring the tone. "But do not confuse your role." Priscilla smiled. a smile that never reached her eyes. You are the help, not family. The Charleston Country Club was the kind of place Goldie was sure would not be welcoming the moment she walked through the door. Marble, chandeliers, people with last names probably found in history books, and her wearing her one decent dress, navy blue, simple, bought on clearance, holding Rosie's hand while Miles walked beside them like a miniature bodyguard. Priscilla entered first, in a red dress so perfect it made the entire room look her way. Chadwick Harrington, her brother, stood next to her. Tall, thin, with eyes that calculated everything. Main table, Priscilla told a waiter, pointing to where she wanted to sit. The waiter looked at Goldie. And the young lady? She sits there. Priscilla pointed to a table in the corner, near the kitchen, where the other staff members were seated. Goldie blinked. Excuse me? You are the children's escort, not a guest. Priscilla was already walking away. The children sit with me. Rosie grabbed Goldie's hand tighter. No, I want to stay with Goldie. Rosie, Priscilla's voice was ice. Behave. But, now. Rosie pulled in a small sob, trying to hold herself together. Goldie knelt, meeting Rosie's eyes. It's all right, dear. I'll be right there. You can see me from here, look. She pointed to the table in the corner. If you need anything, just wave. Miles held his sister's hand. I'll take care of her. But his eyes, when they met Goldie's, held a quiet weight no 10-year-old should carry. The staff table had simple biscuits. Goldie looked at Sir Tix-a-Lot on her wrist. Are you seeing this? She put me at the biscuit table. The biscuit table, Sir Tix, with the drivers, and a waiter on break playing on his phone. The clock kept its steady, expressionless ticking. You always agree with me. That's why we're best friends. The woman next to her, maid's uniform, name unknown, gave a sympathetic smile. First time? First time being publicly sent to the corner in an elite club? Yes. It gets easier. It shouldn't. Dinner began. Goldie ate without tasting anything, her eyes constantly returning to the main table. Miles was tense, Rosie restless. Priscilla smiled at important people while ignoring the children beside her as if they were decoration. That was when Rosie spilled the juice. It wasn't her fault. The glass was too big, too heavy. She tried to reach it, and the red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like paint. Priscilla froze. Then she stood slowly, picked up a napkin, and cleaned her dress with precise movements. Then she looked at Rosie with a coldness that made Goldie get up from her chair without thinking. These children are constant challenges, Priscilla murmured to the table in a calculated tone. Rosie heard it. And you, she said to the girl, are the one who demands the most attention. Rosie's expression collapsed and a strong sob escaped her, drawing everyone's attention. Goldie was already crossing the room. This is not happening, but it was. Priscilla turned to her with eyes like a serpent's. Go back to your place. My place is where these children are. Your place, Priscilla said louder now, and people began to look, is where I say it is. You are only the tutor who thinks she is part of the family, but you're not. You never will be. The room fell silent. Goldie felt her face burn. She felt every eye on her. She felt the weight of humiliation like a stone on her chest. And then Steve walked in. He crossed the room with long strides, still wearing his gardener's clothes, jeans, work shirt, boots covered in dirt, completely out of place among tuxedos and evening gowns. But he didn't seem to notice, or didn't care. He stopped beside Goldie, looked at Priscilla, and his voice was low but sharp. She takes care of this family better than anyone in this room. Priscilla blinked. Excuse me, who are you two? Someone who knows how to recognize value when he sees it. Steve didn't look away. And she is worth more than all of us together. The room exploded in murmurs. Chadwick stood up, his eyes fixed on Steve with something that looked like recognition, and an irritation he could barely hide. Careful, Gardner, employees are replaceable. Not this one. Steve reached out his hand to Goldie. Let's go. But before she could take it, Miles appeared beside her. He held her hand tightly. Looked up with bright eyes. I know you are not a maid, he whispered, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. You are the only one who really cares. Goldie felt tears burn. She squeezed the boy's hand, and then Rosie pulled away from Priscilla, ran, and threw herself into Goldie's arms. Wait, the girl sobbed. I am going too. Priscilla stood frozen. Alone, in front of 200 people, while her stepdaughter chose the tutor instead of her. Chadwick stepped closer to Steve, his voice low and dangerous. "You will regret this." Steve did not answer. He only picked Rosie up, held Miles's hand, and looked at Goldie. "Trust me," and she did. They left together, leaving Priscilla and her charity dinner behind. Steve's phone rang at 6 in the morning. He was already awake. He had not been able to sleep since they left the country club. On the other end of the line, Chadwick's voice was calm. Calm, too dangerous. "I hope you enjoyed your moment of glory, Steve, because it will cost you." Sterling tightened his grip on the phone. "Are you implying something?" "It is only a warning," Chadwick laughed, a laugh without humor. "Priscilla wants that tutor out of the mansion by Monday, and well, gardeners are easy to replace." The call ended. Sterling stood in the empty kitchen, his fists clenched. 48 hours. That was the time Chadwick was giving before acting. He needed to tell the truth. To Goldie. To the children. But how? "Hi, I am actually the owner of the house and I have been lying this whole time," was not a simple conversation. Mabel walked into the kitchen, already dressed, apron perfect. She looked at him with that expression that said, 40 years taught me to read people. Chadwick called. "How did you?" "Because he always calls after someone challenges Priscilla in public." She grabbed a pot and started making coffee. "You have 2 days before she takes the children back and sends Goldie away with a reference letter so bad she will not get a job, even as a plant sitter. I will not let that happen. Then stop pretending to be a gardener and take control of this house." Mabel poured coffee into a cup and pushed it toward him. "You are the heir. Act like one." 3 days later, when the dust began to settle and Priscilla stopped having mysterious meetings with Chadwick in the office, Goldie decided she needed to tame the hose. "You do not scare me," she told the coiled object in the garden. "I am bigger than you. I have opposable thumbs. I evolved." The hose did not answer, but she could swear there was challenge in that green silence. Goldie grabbed the end, turned on the faucet, and splash! The water sprayed straight into her face, again, as if the hose had memory and resentment. "This is not happening," Goldie yelled, trying to cover the hole with her hand and only managing to redirect the jet toward her own feet. "Sir Tix-a-lot, do you see this? Harassment. I will sue. Oh, the jet hit her right in the mouth. "Need help?" Goldie turned, spitting water, and saw Steve standing there, hands in pockets, half a smile, the kind of smile that did strange things to her stomach. "The hose put my name on its list," Goldie declared, still holding the traitorous end. "It is harassment. I can see that." Steve stepped closer, took the hose from her hands with irritating ease, and turned off the faucet. "Have you considered that maybe the problem is not the hose? The problem is the hose. It has a personal drama with me." "Personal drama," Steve repeated, and there was humor in his voice. That dry humor she was beginning to recognize. "Against you specifically." "Yes, look," Goldie pointed at herself, soaked from head to toe. "Evidence." Steve laughed. "For real." A low, surprising sound that made Goldie's heart stumble. "You are the most absurd person I have ever met." "Is that a compliment?" "The biggest one I know how to give." They stood there, close, water dripping from Goldie's hair, the morning sun making everything look golden and unreal. Steve lifted his hand as if to take a leaf from her hair, and his fingers brushed Goldie's cheek. Time stopped, or Sir Tix-a-lot stopped. Goldie was not sure. Steve leaned closer, his eyes on hers, asking, waiting. Goldie closed her eyes. "Goldie!" They jumped apart as if shocked. Miles was at the second-floor window, waving frantically. "I found something strange in Father's office." The secret drawer was behind a panel in the wall. Miles had found it by accident, or because he was a smart child who knew adults hid important things. "I was looking for Dad's pen," Miles explained, pointing to the open panel, the one he always used, "and I saw this strange mark on the wood." Inside the drawer there were only 3 letters. Yellowed paper, steady handwriting, Robert Montgomery's signature at the end. Steve took the first one. He began reading it out loud. "If something happens to me, protect the children from Priscilla. She is not who she says she is. She married me for money, and I know Chadwick is involved. The real will is with someone I trust. Do not let her touch the children's inheritance." Silence fell like lead. Miles pulled the letter out of Steve's hands, his eyes running over the words. He read it once, twice, and then his face broke. He knew. The boy's voice cracked. "He tried to protect us." And Miles cried. For the first time since the funeral. Loud, desperate sobs that made Goldie's chest ache. She knelt down and pulled the boy into an embrace. He held on to her as if he were drowning. "He didn't leave us on purpose," Miles sobbed. He tried. "I know, sweetheart, I know." Steve picked up the other 2 letters. The second one was for the family lawyer. The third, he froze. "What is it?" Goldie asked over Miles's head. Steve turned the letter toward her. On the envelope, written by hand, "For Sterling. Open only in emergency." "He knew you would come back," Goldie whispered. But before Steve could answer, Rosie came running down the hallway, her face pale. "Mrs. Priscilla is coming, and there is a man in a suit with her." Steve put the letters away quickly. "How many men?" "2. They look angry." Goldie looked at Steve. "What do we do?" And for the first time since she had met him, Steve looked genuinely concerned. "Hide the children, now." "Why?" The front door burst open. Priscilla's voice echoed through the hallway, cold and triumphant. "Where is the tutor? I have dismissal papers for her to sign." Goldie pushed Miles and Rosie behind her skirt at the exact moment Priscilla turned the corner. The stepmother was followed by 2 men in gray suits. One carried a leather briefcase, the other simply crossed his arms as if he were paid to intimidate. Steve did not move from his place at the door, but Goldie saw his shoulders tighten. Oh, what a touching scene. Priscilla stopped 3 meters away, her smile sharp as glass. The tutor playing mother. But the game is over. The man with the briefcase stepped forward. "Miss Bennett, I am Mrs. Montgomery's attorney. I have here the termination papers for your contract for just cause, improper conduct, insubordination, and attempted parental alienation." "Alienation what?" Goldie blinked. "That is not even a real thing. It is very real." Priscilla examined her nails. "And documented. Witnesses at the charity dinner saw you disrespecting my authority in front of the children. You called Rosie Careful." Priscilla's voice was ice. "People like you are replaceable, and I expect this replacement to last longer than the others." Miles squeezed Goldie's hand tightly. Rosie started crying softly. Steve finally moved. "She is not going anywhere." The second man, the intimidating one, stepped toward him. "And who are you to decide that, Gardner? Someone who knows those papers mean nothing." Steve looked at the lawyer. "Miss Bennett's contract was signed directly with Mr. Montgomery, not with the widow. She has no legal authority to end it." The lawyer hesitated, only 1 second, but it was enough. Priscilla noticed. Her eyes narrowed. Interesting. A Gardner who understands legal contracts. "I read a lot," Steve said, and there was something dangerous in his calm. "I am sure you do." Priscilla smiled, but there was no humor in it. "But the truth is simple. This is my house now, and I decide who stays." She looked at Goldie. "You have until Monday to pack your bags. If you are still here after that, I will call the police for trespassing." "You cannot." "I can, and I will." Priscilla turned, her heels echoing on the marble floor. The 2 men followed her like well-dressed shadows. When the door closed, Miles exploded. "She cannot do that. You cannot let her do that." But Steve was looking at the door with an expression Goldie could not read. Something between anger and determination, and something else that seemed dangerously close to guilt. "It will be all right," Goldie said, kneeling in front of the children, lying, because she did not know if it would. "I promise." Rosie threw herself into her arms. "Do not go away. Please do not go away." And Goldie held the girl, feeling the weight of promises she was not sure she could keep. Hours later, when the house finally grew quiet and the children were in bed, Goldie went downstairs to the kitchen. She needed tea, or chocolate, or answers. Anything that might loosen the knot in her chest. Mabel was there, of course, because 40 years in that house had given her a 6th sense for crises. "Chamomile tea," the cook said, pushing a steaming cup toward Goldie. "Or chocolate? Your choice." "Both." Goldie dropped into a chair. "Mabel, what is happening? Why is Priscilla so desperate to get me out of here?" "Because you are getting in the way of her plans." "What plans?" Mabel stayed silent for a long moment. Then she sighed, pulled out a chair, and sat heavily. "Girl, you are as curious as a cat. And you know what happens to curious cats, right? They discover the truth and live happily. They lose one of the 7 lives." Mabel took her own cup of tea. "But since you are going to stick your nose where it does not belong anyway, I may as well tell you before you do something worse." Goldie leaned forward. "Tell me what?" The night Mr. Montgomery died, Mabel began, her voice low. I saw Priscilla and that lawyer Chadwick in the office, 2 in the morning, exchanging papers, documents, whispering and laughing like they had just won the lottery. Goldie's stomach turned. You think they? I do not know what they did, but I know it was not natural, and I know Steve. Mabel stopped, bit her lip. Steve what? Steve is not who you think he is. The cook looked at Goldie with something that resembled pity. But he is better than you imagine, and when you learn who he is, you will understand why he is here. Mabel, you are not making sense. I am making too much sense, and that scares you. Mabel stood up. Just promise me one thing. When you learn the truth about him, remember that people lie for different reasons, some to hurt, others to protect. Then she left, leaving Goldie alone with cooling tea and more questions than answers. Goldie took Sir Tix-a-Lot from her pocket. Her grandfather's watch shone softly under the kitchen light. What do you think? She whispered. Do I trust him? The watch did not answer, but the ticking seemed to say, careful, careful, careful. 2 hours later, Goldie was crouched behind a velvet curtain in Chadwick's office downtown, questioning every decision that had brought her there. This is not happening, she whispered to herself. I am not breaking into a law office. This is something from a movie. Normal people do not do this. But she had followed Priscilla. She had seen the woman enter the building, and something, instinct, desperation, or pure stubbornness, made Goldie slip through the back door a security guard had left open for a smoke break. Now she was trapped. Because Priscilla and Chadwick were in the office next door, and their voices carried through the half-open door. In 2 weeks, everything will legally be mine. Priscilla's voice was full of triumph. And those children will go to a boarding school in Switzerland. Chadwick laughed. Far enough for you to forget they exist. Those brats are obstacles, not family. They always were. The sound of clinking glasses, champagne being poured. And the gardener? Chadwick asked. He is asking too many questions. Gardeners are replaceable. As soon as the tutor leaves, he goes too. Goldie squeezed Sir Tix-a-Lot so tightly she felt the metal press into her hand. Grandpa, she whispered, you taught me to do the right thing, but the right thing has never been this frightening. She needed to leave. She needed to tell someone. Steve. Or... The office door opened. Priscilla stepped out, her heels echoing down the hallway, passing just inches from the curtain where Goldie hid. Then she stopped, turned slowly, looked directly at the curtain. Chadwick, she called, her voice dangerously calm, I believe we have a visitor. Goldie's heart stopped. Behind the velvet curtain, she held her breath as Priscilla's heels clicked on the marble. 1 step, 2, 3, getting closer. Chadwick's voice echoed from the office. What is it? Priscilla did not take her eyes off the curtain. Come out, now. There was no escape, no excuse, nothing but pure humiliation. Goldie stepped out from behind the curtain, Sir Tix-a-Lot clutched in her hand like a protective talisman. Ah! Priscilla crossed her arms, her smile sharp as a blade. The curious tutor? How unsurprising. I can explain. No need. Priscilla took a step forward. You broke into a private office, you spied on a confidential conversation, and now you will deal with the consequences. She turned to Chadwick. Call security. Wait, Goldie raised her hands. I got lost looking for the bathroom and... Liar. The word cut through the air like a whip. You followed me. What did you think you would find? Some secret? Proof of a conspiracy? Priscilla laughed, cold and humorless. You watched too many movies, dear, and now it's over. You're fired. Immediately. I want you out of my house by tomorrow at noon. But the children are not your problem. Priscilla turned, her heels echoing. And if you try to talk to them, I guarantee you will never work as a tutor anywhere again. Understood? Goldie stood in the empty hallway, Sir Tix-a-Lot's ticking the only sound besides her unsteady breathing. This is not happening, she whispered. This is definitely not happening. But it was. 2 hours later, Goldie was sitting on the floor of her room, surrounded by half-folded clothes and stacked books, staring at the open suitcase as if it were a death sentence. So this is it, Sir Tix-a-Lot. She held the watch up to her eyes. It was good while it lasted. You, me, the killer hose. Good times. Pause. Okay, the hose won't miss me. The feeling is mutual. The watch kept its relentless ticking. Goldie threw another blouse into the suitcase. You think I should have stayed quiet? Of course you do. You've always been the sensible one between the two of us. She sighed. But those children's are ticks, they need someone, and Priscilla will destroy them. A soft knock on the door. Mabel walked in without waiting for an answer, carrying a tray with tea and cookies. I thought you might need this. I need a miracle, but tea works too. The cook set the tray on the dresser and looked at the suitcase. So you're really leaving? I don't have a choice. There's always a choice, girl. The question is whether you have the courage to make the right one. Goldie looked at her. And which one is right? The one that hurts more now but saves more people later. Mabel touched her shoulder briefly. The children are waiting for you. I think you owe them a goodbye. Miles and Rosie were sitting side by side on his bed, so quiet they looked like statues. When Goldie walked in, Rosie jumped up and ran, throwing herself into Goldie's arms so hard she almost knocked her over. Don't go, the little girl sobbed against Goldie's neck. Please don't go. Rosie, sweetheart. Everyone goes. Her voice was pure desperation. Daddy left, Mom left. Why does everyone I love leave? Goldie knelt down, holding the girl's face in her hands. I'm not going, I promise. But Mrs. Priscilla said, I don't care what she said, and Goldie realized she meant it. I promise I'll find a way to stay, even if I have to fight. All right? Rosie nodded, her eyes huge and wet. Miles was still sitting on the bed, arms crossed, his face a mask of control. But Goldie saw the crack, the way he bit his lip, the way his shoulders shook. Miles? The boy exploded, not in tears, but in words. You promised. You said you'd stay. You said you were different. And I am. You're not. You're just like everyone else. You're leaving, and you're leaving us with her. He pointed toward the door. Heck, toward the hallway, toward wherever Priscilla was. And we'll be alone again. Goldie crossed the room and pulled the boy into a hug. He resisted for a second, two, and then collapsed. Not crying. Miles never cried, but shaking as if he were breaking apart inside. I'm not leaving, Goldie whispered. I promise. I swear. And then the door opened. Steve walked in, still in his work shirt, dirt on his hands, but something about him was different. Something more solid, more dangerous. You're not going anywhere, he said. Goldie blinked. Steve, I don't have a choice. She fired me. She doesn't have the authority to do that. Steve looked at the children. Miles, Rosie, go with Mabel for a few minutes. I need to talk to Goldie. But now. The tone left no room for discussion. The children left, Rosie looking back with wide eyes. When the door closed, Steve turned to Goldie. Where is she? Who? Priscilla. Probably in her office, planning how to turn my life into an even bigger. Steve was already moving. Goldie ran after him through the hallway, down the stairs, across the entry hall. Steve, what are you going to do? He didn't answer. He just opened Priscilla's office door with such force it hit the wall. Priscilla looked up from her papers, her expression shifting from surprise to disdain. Oh, the gardener. Did you come to say goodbye too? She stays, Steve said. Excuse me? Goldie. She stays. You cancel the firing, Priscilla laughed. You're the gardener. You have no say here. Steve stepped forward, and there was something in his posture, something that made Priscilla step back instinctively. I have more influence than you think, he said, his voice cold. She stays. Or you leave tonight. Silence fell like a guillotine. Priscilla rose slowly, her eyes narrowing. Who do you think you are? Someone who knows every secret in this family. Steve leaned over the table. Including yours. Priscilla's face paled. Only for a second, but it was enough. You're bluffing. Am I? Steve smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Want to take the risk? Priscilla looked at him, then at Goldie, then back at him, and then, surprisingly, she stepped back. She has until Friday, Priscilla said, her voice tight. One wrong move and she's out. Understood? Steve didn't answer. He just turned and walked out, Goldie stumbling behind him. In the hallway, she finally managed to speak. What just happened? Steve stopped, looked at her, and for the first time, Goldie saw something in his eyes that made her realize he was hiding more than she imagined. What happened is that you stayed, he said. And now we need to figure out how to keep it that way. But how did you? The office door opened behind them. Priscilla stood in the doorway. Priscilla's voice cut through the hallway like broken glass. You're still here? Goldie froze, but Steve simply turned, expressionless. We were leaving. And then he did something Goldie never expected. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that said, "I know something you don't," and it made Priscilla step back half a pace before slamming the door shut. Steve guided Goldie down the hallway, his hands steady on her back. Only when they reached the garden did he stop. "Are you all right?" "No." Goldie pulled away, her heart still racing. "None of this is all right? What did you say to her? How did you do that?" "I did what needed to be done." "That's not an answer." Steve ran his hand through his hair, and for the first time since Goldie met him, he looked tired. "Trust me, please." "I do." And it was true. What scared her was how much. "But I need to understand what's going on." "You will. Soon." He touched her face, just for a second. "I promise." And then he walked away, leaving Goldie alone with Sir Tix-a-Lot and 1,000 unanswered questions. The next day passed in a blur of lessons with the children and suspicious looks from Priscilla. In the afternoon, Goldie was in the kitchen helping Mabel peel potatoes. Because apparently being a tutor also meant being a kitchen assistant when necessary. "You're too quiet," Mabel said, slicing carrots with surgical precision. "That's never a good sign." "Just thinking about how that gardener stood up to the lady of the house yesterday." Goldie almost dropped the knife. "How did you—" 40 years in this house, girl, I know everything." Mabel gave a conspiratorial smile. "Including that old Montgomery had a safe in the basement no one has opened in years." Goldie's heart skipped. "A safe?" He kept the important documents there. Will, deeds, that kind of thing." A meaningful pause. "The combination is written on the back of his portrait in the library. He told me once in case something happened." "And you're telling me this because 40 years taught me. Always have a plan B." Mabel wiped her hands on her apron. "And you, dear, need a plan." Midnight found Goldie going down the stairs to the basement with only a flashlight and questionable courage. "This is not happening," she whispered, the light shaking in her hand. "I am not sneaking into a basement in the middle of the night. Normal people sleep at midnight. They don't do this." The basement smelled of mold and old secrets. Cobwebs hung from the corners. Something creaked in the dark. "Sir Tix-a-Lot." Goldie pressed the watch in her pocket. "If something happens to me here, tell the hose it won. It will make her day." The safe was exactly where Mabel said it would be, behind an old bookshelf, built into the wall. Goldie entered the combination with trembling fingers. Click. The door opened. Inside were folders, sealed envelopes, and, in the center, a document with the official seal of a notary office. "Last will and testament of Richard Montgomery." Goldie picked up the paper, the flashlight lighting up the words. "I leave the entirety of my assets, properties, and responsibilities to my son, Sterling James Montgomery, on the condition that he assume legal guardianship of his siblings Miles and Rosie. To my wife Priscilla, I leave the furniture of her room and my gratitude for 3 years of companionship." "Wow," Goldie whispered. "She gets nothing. Nothing." That was why Priscilla was so desperate. Why Chadwick was involved. Why the official will that would be read was different. Goldie took out her phone and began photographing each page, the flash lighting the basement in brief bursts of white. She was putting her phone away when she heard footsteps. Someone was coming down the stairs. Goldie turned off the flashlight, her heart jumping in her chest. She pressed herself against the wall, praying that the basement light turned on. Chadwick stood on the last step, his suit perfect even at midnight, and his eyes found Goldie's immediately. "Well, well." He walked down slowly, blocking the stairs. The curious tutor, again. "I was just looking for cleaning supplies." "Liar." He crossed the basement in 3 steps and grabbed her arm. Hard, very hard. "You should not have found this. Now we have a problem." "Let go of me. I cannot do that." Chadwick pulled her phone from her pocket. "And I will need this too." Goldie tried to pull free, but he was stronger, and panic was starting to choke any rational thought when the basement door burst open. Steve came down the stairs like a storm, and there was something different about him. Something dangerous. Something that made even Chadwick step back. "Let her go." His voice was cold. "Now. Or what? You are a gardener. The only problem here is you, Chadwick." And then Steve moved, pushing the lawyer away with a firm shove, strong enough to knock him off balance. The man lost his footing and hit the ground like a sack of potatoes. Silence. Chadwick groaned. Steve picked up Goldie's phone from the floor and handed it back to her. then grabbed Chadwick by the collar and dragged him up the stairs as if he were a suitcase. Goldie stood in the empty basement, shaking. When Steve returned, alone, his eyes still dark, she finally managed to speak. "Who are you really?" Steve stopped on the last step. For a long moment, he only looked at her, and then finally the mask fell. "Someone who should have told you before." He walked down slowly, each word heavy. "My name is not Steve. It is Sterling. Sterling Montgomery." A pause. "I am the owner of this house, and those children are my siblings." Goldie's world tilted. "You, what?" "I hid as a gardener because I needed to know who was trying to destroy my family." He took a step forward. "And then you appeared, and everything changed. You lied to me. I protected you." His voice was rough. "If Priscilla had known who I was, she would have used you against me. She would have hurt you. So you used me first?" "No." Sterling crossed the space between them in 2 steps. "Never. Everything I felt, everything I said, it was real." Goldie looked at him, at the man she had known as Steve, who was now Sterling, who had always been more than he pretended to be. "Prove it," she whispered. And then he kissed her. It was not a calm kiss. It was honest, urgent, full of everything they had both held back for too long. He held her face gently. She pulled him closer, as if she could finally breathe. For a moment, the world grew small and quiet around them. When they pulled away, both needed a second to catch their breath and understand what that moment meant. "Do you believe me now?" Sterling asked, his forehead against hers. Before Goldie could answer, a voice cut through the air from the top of the stairs. What a touching scene. Priscilla stood in the doorway, holding a black folder, open, with several papers slipping out, the very same ones Goldie had found in the safe. Her smile was the kind of smile someone has when they hold another person's life in their hands. "Now," she said, lifting the folder as if it were a sentence, "we are going to have a conversation about what you have been snooping in." Time slowed down. Goldie saw every detail. The threatening papers in Priscilla's hand, the cold look in the woman's eyes, and Sterling stepping forward, placing his body between Goldie and that silent threat. "Put that down, Priscilla," he said, with a voice that was no longer Steve's, the gardener's. It was pure command. "Now." "Or what?" Priscilla stepped down 1 stair, the folder tight in her hands. "Will you tell the truth, that the missing heir was hiding as an employee in his own house?" "I was not hiding." Sterling stepped forward, completely shielding Goldie. "I was watching you destroy my father's legacy." "Your father left me with nothing." Priscilla's voice cracked. 3 years of marriage, and he treated me like furniture. "Because you were always about the money." Sterling crossed his arms. "And now you are using those documents as a threat against an innocent woman. Do you think that will end well?" The kitchen light turned on upstairs. "What is going on here?" Mabel's voice cut the tension like butter. The cook appeared at the top of the stairs, holding a cast-iron skillet, like someone who knew how to use it. "Priscilla Harrington, put that thing down before I come down there and make you regret it." Behind her, Miles appeared in pajamas, his eyes wide. "Sterling?" And it was that single word from the 10-year-old boy, that made Priscilla's hands tremble. "Sterling?" Miles came down the steps slowly, looking at the gardener, at his brother. "Is that you?" "Hi, champ," Sterling said, his voice gentle. "Sorry for the surprise." The briefcase fell. Priscilla let the documents slip from her hands and ran up the stairs, pushing Mabel and Miles aside. Seconds later, a door slammed upstairs. Silence. Goldie let out the breath she didn't know she was holding. "This is not happening." Miles came down the rest of the stairs, stopped in front of Sterling, and did something no one expected. He slapped his arm hard. "Hey," Sterling pulled back. "What was that for?" "For letting me think you were missing." Miles hit his arm again, more indignant than angry. 6 months. 6 months thinking you were gone." "Miles, I took care of Rosie alone. I dealt with that difficult woman alone." Tears began to fall. "And you were here the whole time?" Miles hugged him. Tight. Desperate. Sterling closed his eyes and returned the hug, and Goldie felt something break in her chest. 40 years, Mabel murmured as she came down the stairs with the frying pan still in her hand. "And this family still manages to surprise me." 20 minutes later, they were all in the kitchen. Mabel was making hot chocolate. Miles refused to let go of Sterling's arm, and Goldie sat at the table, trying to process that the man who kissed her in the basement was a billionaire CEO. So, she finally said, looking at Sterling, because he wasn't Steve anymore, he had never been Steve. You are rich, technically, yes, and the owner of this mansion, yes, and I spent weeks complaining about the absent boss to the actual boss. Sterling actually looked embarrassed. You had valid points. Goldie stood up, sat down again, stood up again. Sir Tix-a-lot helped me. She took the watch from her pocket and held it. So I fell in love with the owner of the house thinking he was the guy who cuts the grass? Technically, Sterling said, I also cut the grass. Not helping, Sterling. Miles sniffed, smiling despite the dried tears. You like him? Goldie looked at the boy, then at Sterling, then at her own hands. I liked Steve. Sterling, I don't even know. They are the same person, Sterling said softly. Are they? Goldie finally looked at him. Really looked. Because Steve was kind and protective and made me laugh. Sterling is a billionaire who hid who he was. I never lied about what I felt, but you lied about everything else. To protect you. Sterling stood, frustrated. Priscilla wouldn't have hesitated to use you against me if she knew the truth. To hurt you, too. So you used me first? I loved you first. Silence fell like snow. Mabel quietly pulled Miles out of the kitchen, murmuring something about checking on Rosie. Goldie and Sterling were alone, the table between them feeling like an ocean. You cannot throw that word around like that, Goldie whispered. I'm not throwing it. Sterling walked around the table. Slowly. I fell in love with you when I saw you teach Miles about dinosaurs using vegetables. When you lost that epic battle with the hose. When you hugged Rosie for the first time and she smiled. She smiled. For the first time in months. He stopped in front of her. I fell in love with the woman who talks to watches and narrates her own disasters and cares so much it hurts. Sterling touched her face gently. Steve or Sterling, the name doesn't matter. The person is the same. Goldie closed her eyes, pressing his hand to her cheek. I fell in love with Steve. I need to know Sterling. Then get to know me. He knelt, looking up at her. They are the same person. The only difference is that Sterling can give you the world. I don't want the world. Goldie opened her eyes. I want truth. I want trust. I want revenge. She blinked. What? Sterling smiled. That dangerous smile she saw when he faced Priscilla. Priscilla's planning to announce a fake will at the charity ball on Friday. All of society will be there, lawyers, judges, the press, and we are going to show up with the real will. He stood, pulling her up with him. We are going to expose her in front of everyone, but I need your help. Goldie looked at him. At the eyes she knew, on the face she loved, belonging to the man she was learning to know. What is the plan? 2 hours later, the kitchen looked like a command center. Mabel was at the stove making coffee. Miles had a notebook open, writing furiously. Rosie slept in Goldie's lap, unaware of the conspiracy around her. So, Sterling said, pointing to the sketch on the table, Priscilla will make the announcement at 9. We need to arrive at 8:45. Enough time to... Wait. Goldie raised her free hand. How are we getting in? I am not part of high society. You will be my guest. You're... What? Sterling Montgomery showing up at the ball after 6 months will cause a stir, Mabel explained, serving coffee. You at his side will bring questions. Questions are good. Questions distract. I do not have a gown for a ball. I have a credit card, Sterling said. Problem solved. You cannot just... I can, and I will. He leaned closer. Do you trust me? Goldie looked at Rosie, sleeping peacefully, at Miles, who finally seemed to have hope, at Mabel, who smiled like someone who knew justice was coming. If this goes wrong, she said, Priscilla could destroy all of us before the police even arrives. Then it cannot go wrong. Sterling held out his hand. Are you with me? Goldie touched Sir Tix-a-lot in her pocket. She thought about all the times she had put herself last, all the times she had been afraid, all the times she had let someone else decide for her. And she took a deep breath. Not this time. Goldie hardly recognized herself in the mirror. The midnight blue gown flowed over her shoulders like water, and for the first time in years, she did not look invisible. Sterling appeared at the door, dressed in a dark suit, and for a moment neither of them were gardener or tutor. They were warriors going into battle. Mabel handed over the envelope. Finish her. The grand ballroom at the Whitmore Hotel shone like a jewelry box. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids, and people wearing more money than Goldie would earn in a year. She squeezed Sterling's hand as they walked through the double doors. "This is not happening," she murmured. "It is." Sterling squeezed her hand back. "And you look beautiful." At the center of the room, Priscilla reigned. Bright red dress, diamonds around her neck, smiling at the crowd like a queen about to be crowned. Beside her, Chadwick, the lawyer with the still swollen nose, adjusted papers on a small podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," Priscilla said into the microphone, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Thank you for being here on this special night. As you know, my late husband, Richard Montgomery, left clear instructions regarding the future of the Montgomery Group." Goldie felt Sterling tense beside her. "And tonight," Priscilla continued, "we will finally honor his wishes." Chadwick stepped up to the microphone, holding a document. "Mr. Montgomery's will is very clear." "Excuse me." Sterling's voice cut across the ballroom like a blade. Every head turned. Priscilla froze, her smile turning to ice when she saw who stood at the entrance. "What is the gardener doing here?" She hissed into the microphone, forgetting to turn it off. Sterling walked through the ballroom, each step measured, powerful. "Gardening. Pulling the weeds out of my family." Whispers erupted. People turned, whispering. Phone cameras lifted. "Sterling Montgomery?" someone shouted. "Is he alive?" "Very much alive." Sterling stepped onto the stage. Priscilla stepped back as if he burned. "And I have a few things to say about that will." Chadwick tried to hide the papers. "Mr. Montgomery, this is highly irregular." "You know what is irregular?" Sterling pulled the microphone from the stand. "Forging the signature of a man who is no longer alive. That is irregular, and a crime." Priscilla laughed, but it sounded strained. "You are imagining things. 6 months missing and you return with ridiculous accusations." "Ridiculous," Sterling motioned. Mabel appeared at the side of the ballroom, carrying a box. "Mabel Jenkins worked for my family for 40 years. 40 years of watching, documenting, waiting." Mabel climbed onto the stage with difficulty, but with determination. She placed the box on the table with a satisfying thud. "My dear," she said, looking at Priscilla, 40 years in that house taught me one thing. Always have a plan B." Sterling pulled a recorder from the box, pressed play. Priscilla's voice filled the ballroom. "Those children are obstacles, not family. The faster I get rid of them, the faster the money is mine." Collective gasps, cameras clicking. Priscilla turned pale. This was taken out of context." Sterling played another file. "Chadwick will forge the signature. No one will question it. Richard has been dead for months." Chadwick tried to grab the box. Mabel hit his hand with a wooden spoon that appeared out of nowhere. "Not so fast, dear. These recordings are illegal," Chadwick shouted. "They cannot be used. They can when there is suspicion of fraud." A new voice. A man in a suit entered, police badge at his belt. "Detective Harris. We received an anonymous tip." He looked at Mabel, who smiled innocently. "You cannot arrest me." Priscilla backed away, looking for an exit. "I am Priscilla Montgomery." "It is Priscilla Harrington," Sterling corrected, his voice cold. "You were never a Montgomery, and you never will be." He pulled another document from the box, this one with an official seal. "My father's real will, leaving everything to me and my siblings. With you," he pointed at Priscilla. "Getting what you deserve. Nothing." Priscilla looked around, at the cameras, at the horrified guests, at the police officers approaching. Something broke in her expression. "I gave the best years of my life to this family." Sterling stepped down from the stage, stopping in front of her. When he spoke, his voice was low, but every word echoed. "You gave the worst, and now it's over." The handcuffs clicked. Priscilla screamed, fought, but the officers took her away. Chadwick tried to run through the side exit, straight into another officer waiting there. "I can pay," Chadwick shouted. "Name your price." "Save it for bail," the officer said, cuffing him too. The room exploded. Reporters running toward Sterling, questions being shouted, camera flashes. But Sterling looked for only one person. Goldie was at the back, hands on her face, tears falling. When their eyes met through the crowd, she smiled, the smile that made everything worth it. He pushed through the sea of people, ignoring questions until he was in front of her. "So," he said, "still want to meet Sterling?" Goldie took Sir Tix-a-lot from her pocket, looked at the watch. "What do you think, Sir Tix-a-lot?" Dramatic pause. Then she looked up. "He says you look good in a suit." Sterling laughed, the real laugh she loved. Just good? Don't ruin the moment, Montgomery. He pulled her close, forehead against hers. Ruining moments is the gardener's specialty. The good news is I'm the CEO now. Still pulling weeds? Always. He kissed her forehead. But now I can hire someone for the hose. Goldie laughed through her tears. You're never going to let me forget that, are you? Never. Behind them, Mabel cleared her throat loudly. Far be it from me to interrupt, but there are 2 children at home waiting for news. Sterling turned, still holding Goldie. Then let's go home. As they walked through the hotel doors, camera flashes bursting behind them, Goldie whispered, Your life is never going to be normal again. Normal is overrated. Sterling opened the car door. Ed, I prefer extraordinary. And when she got in, when he closed the door and walked around, Goldie touched Sir Tix-a-lot once more. I think, she told the watch, this is happening. The watch didn't answer. But for the first time, she didn't need it to. She already knew the answer. The magnolias were blooming again. 3 months had passed since that night at the hotel, and Goldie hadn't fallen into a single puddle, a personal record, until Sterling suggested a walk in the garden at sunset. Why do I feel like this is not going to end well for me? Goldie asked while he held her hand, guiding her along the stone paths. Because you have excellent survival instincts. This is not happening. Sterling smiled. It is. The last 3 months had been a controlled whirlwind. Priscilla and Chadwick were awaiting trial, separately, each blaming the other. The headlines had finally changed from missing heir to fraud exposed. Miles was smiling again, the kind of smile that lit up entire rooms. Rosie wouldn't stop talking, especially about, when is Goldie going to live here forever? And Mabel? Mabel got a raise, the official title of honorary grandma, and full control of the menu, which meant pie appeared at every meal. You're taking me to the Magnolia Garden, Goldie said, recognizing the path. The place where I fell face first into mud on the first day. Seemed appropriate. Appropriate for what? Reliving my trauma? Sterling stopped under the magnolia arch. The sun was setting behind them, painting everything gold and pink. And there, in the center of the garden, was the hose. The same hose that had declared war on her months ago. Goldie pointed. Okay, no jokes today, all right? This is my moment. The hose did nothing. Sir Tix-a-lot, did you see that? Goldie tapped the watch on her wrist. She respects me now. The hose sprayed one tiny drop at her. Okay? Goldie wiped her face. Respect with conditions, I accept. Goldie, she turned. Sterling was on one knee. The world stopped. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Yes, 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 Sterling said, smiling. This is not happening. Marigold Bennett. He pulled a box from his pocket. These last months you changed this house. Miles laughs. Rosie won't stop talking. Mabel sings while she cooks. And he opened the box. I remember what it feels like to be alive. The ring shone in the golden light. Simple, elegant, with a small engraved antique clock in the center. Goldie covered her mouth with both hands. You showed me that wealth is the people who love you when you have nothing, Sterling continued, his voice shaking. I pretended to be poor and you loved me anyway. You loved the gardener. You loved the man who pulled weeds and fixed fences. I loved Steve, Goldie said, crying. And I love Sterling, because both have the same heart. Movement in the corner of the garden. Miles appeared, holding a pillow with 2 rings. Rosie stood beside him, a basket of petals in her hands, smiling so wide she looked like she might burst. They knew? Goldie asked. It was their idea, Sterling admitted. Miles chose the place. Rosie insisted on the petals. And Mabel. He looked back. Mabel was on the porch, handkerchief in hand, crying openly. Mabel approved the menu for the party, Sterling finished. What party? The one that will happen if you say yes. Goldie looked at Miles, who gave her an encouraging nod. At Rosie, who threw petals into the air too early. At Mabel, who shouted, Say yes, dear. At the garden hose, which, for once, was completely well-behaved. And then at Sterling, at the man she met as a gardener. At the CEO, who stood up to the stepmother. At the older brother who loved his siblings more than any inheritance. The ring, she said, her voice trembling. It has a clock. For Lady Tix-a-lot, Sterling smiled. I thought it was fitting. You engraved a clock on my engagement ring. I did. That is the most absurd and perfect thing anyone has ever done for me. So is it a yes? Goldie took Sir Tix-a-lot off her wrist, looked at the watch. What do you think, old friend? A pause. The watch ticked softly. He says, she looked at Sterling, tears falling. He says you looked good on one knee. Sterling laughed. That laugh she loved. Only good? Don't ruin the moment, Montgomery. Is it a yes? It's a yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. Perfect, as if it had been made to be there. Rosie burst into applause, throwing petals everywhere. Miles smiled, that shy smile that appeared more and more. Mabel hurried down from the porch with impressive speed for someone 68 years old. I knew it, Mabel shouted, hugging them both. 40 years in this house, and finally a happy ending. Technically, Miles said, stepping closer, it's a happy beginning. Sterling pulled his brother into a hug. When did you get so wise? I always was, you just didn't pay attention. Rosie hugged Goldie's leg. Now you're going to live here forever? Goldie knelt down, brushing a petal from the girl's hair. Forever? And you'll be like a mommy? The garden went quiet. Goldie looked at Sterling, who nodded, permission and hope in his eyes. If you want, Goldie whispered. I want to. Rosie threw her arms around her neck. I want it very much. Sterling wrapped his arms around them. Miles joined in, and Mabel took a picture with her phone. For the family album, she explained, wiping her eyes. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had completely set. The garden lanterns turned on automatically, making the magnolias look magical. So, Sterling said, intertwining his fingers with Goldie's. Ready for the party? What party? Music began playing inside the house. Lights came on, and through the kitchen door people started walking out. Mansion staff, neighbors, even Detective Harris with his wife. You planned an engagement party, Goldie said, before I said yes. Confidence, Sterling said. Arrogance. Hope. Goldie looked at the ring, at the small engraved clock, at Sir Tix-a-Lot in her other hand, at the family around her, chosen, earned, loved. Sir Tix-a-Lot, she said to the watch, I think we finally found our place. The watch ticked, and for the first time in years, Goldie didn't need to imagine the answer. She was living it. Sterling pulled her toward the improvised dance floor on the grass. Ready for the next chapter, Lady Tix-a-Lot? Goldie looked back, at the hose which chose that exact moment to spray water on them. Mabel, Goldie shouted. The hose is alive. Mabel laughed from the porch. Dear, she's just celebrating. Celebrating by soaking me? It's her way of showing love. Sterling spun Goldie, both of them laughing, soaked and perfectly happy. And as they danced under the magnolias, under the stars, surrounded by family and love, and an apparently sentient hose, Goldie whispered, This is happening. Sterling kissed her forehead. Yes, it is. And this time, she believed it. What did you think about Goldie falling in love with the gardener, who was actually the owner of the mansion? About Rosie asking if Goldie would be her mommy? And about the epic war between Goldie and the hose? Leave your opinion in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what rating would you give this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notifications to receive more emotional stories like this. See you next time.